Today's session is facilitated by Mr. George Vassilakis, who is the director of ACE TEFL. And today's session is going to be about building rapport face-to-face and online. We all know that building rapport is, the very first thing we start our sessions with, or, if you have a new course. So today we're going to be learning about how can we do so throughout online or face-to-face. I'm just going to let you know about our presenter today, Mr. George. He has trained EFL teachers for over 30 years. His training experience includes designing and running pre-service and in-service courses, seminars, and webinars on a variety of specialist topics, as well as planning, coordinating, and teaching on qualifying courses such as the Cambridge CELTA and Delta. George also has written a number of course books for young learners, adults, and young adults, which has been published by Heinemann, Cengage, and Macmillan. He also designed courses and curricula for a number of different learning contexts, including academic English, business English, and English for teachers. He also has an extensive ELT management experience, having been academic director, director of assessment services, and director of English education for different organizations for over 20 years. George is currently a trainer and trainer at ACE TEFL. He is a teacher development center in Athens, which he co-founded with Alexander Makarios in 2021. ACE TEFL offers CELTA, Delta, and train-the-trainer courses throughout the year, which is running, face-to-face and online. I had the pleasure to be one of George's students in train-the-trainer course, and it was an amazing course, and really enjoyed it. So I'm really glad to be here and joining this session. Welcome, George.
Thank you for enlightening me, Lamia, and thanks everyone for your patience. So are we ready? Ready to start? Great. So first of all, can I check after I've shared that you can see my slides? Are they coming up?
Yep, we can see it, George.
Excellent. So it's the beginning, I was saying before, but nobody could hear me because I had stupidly muted myself. I was saying that it's the beginning of the school year, so it's a good time to think about rapport, to think about how we can build a relationship with a student, whether we're teaching in an online classroom or face-to-face. And I understand, fortunately, a lot of us have finally gone back to doing at least some face-to-face teaching, but online teaching is also here to stay. So we're going to be looking at procedures and suggestions that can help us build and maintain rapport with our classes, whether they're face-to-face or online. But I'd like to start with a definition of rapport so we can make sure we're all on the same page. What is rapport? What does it involve? If you check some of the standard educational books and methodology books and TEFL books, you'll find different definitions of rapport, but there are certain dimensions, which I think are probably the most important ones, which they all have in common. I'm going to look at a definition from Jeremy Harmer, who we all know, and another one from Scrivener, Jim Scrivener, talking about rapport, especially in the EFL class environment. And starting with Harmer, the first dimension of rapport that he identifies is recognizing students. Now, that doesn't just mean recognizing them in the sense that you see them and you know who they are, like that's Lamia and this is Mohammadi, I recognize the face. There's more to it than that. There's recognizing that they have something to say, acknowledging their presence, and listening to them. Listening to them, whether their contribution is relevant to whatever the class is about or not. So listening to them equally when they answer a grammar question and when they have a contribution to make or something to say that relates to their own lives. And together, hand in hand with recognizing and listening to students, comes respecting them and making sure that at all times they feel that they are of value as individuals. And for students to feel respected, it means that you give the same kind of attention to all of them, that nobody feels left out and nobody else feels that they get an advantage or that they're privileged over other students. So that would be being even-handed in Jeremy Harmer's words. Scrivener says quite a few things that are similar. He too talks about showing respect. He too talks about being fair. He too talks about listening to students. But he also adds, to make things a little clearer and a little more practical, the importance of giving the students very clear and also positive feedback. Positive here doesn't mean that you always tell them you are fantastic, you are excellent, you are great, but it means that your feedback is constructive. And he adds, perhaps strangely for some, being authentically oneself. So being yourself in the classroom, not adopting a different personality, not checking your personality at the classroom door and coming in and pretending to be someone else, because this, guess what, is something that students will immediately sense and might lead them to lose their respect for you. So these are some of the aspects of rapport, or in other words, a constructive relationship between students and between students and the teacher. Some teachers feel it doesn't really matter. As long as I know my stuff and as long as I can tell them what I know, what does rapport matter? Well, in fact, it does matter. And the main reason that it matters is that many classroom behaviors, which are generally considered problematic, are in fact problems of the way that teachers and learners relate to each other interpersonally. At the root, at the bottom of a lot of these problems that may appear to have to do with other things is the relationship between students and teachers. Marzano's research has indicated the effect of the student-teacher relationship on achievement of learning objectives is in fact extremely strong, to the point that negative rapport or the absence of rapport can mean the learning objectives are not met. In other words, there is no learning taking place. Now, rapport depends on a mix of factors, which I think we can more easily understand if we look at it in terms of two continua. So the one continuum would be from control to submission. Control means that the teacher provides a clear purpose, they provide clear guidance, and the students have absolutely no questions, no doubts about what the content of the classes is going to be and what behavior is or is not acceptable. In other words, the rules are clear, the behaviors which you expect and condone are clear, and every student is perfectly aware of what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Submission, on the other hand, is when there is not enough clarity about what should be happening, when the messages are mixed. To give you a simple example, if you say one day, I'm never gonna wait for latecomers, the lesson is always gonna start on time, whether you're here or not. And then the next day you say, okay, let's wait another 5 minutes for the latecomers so that they don't miss anything. That's a mixed message. So that leans towards submission. And whether we realize it or not, we give away some of the control that is conducive to a good classroom atmosphere that is conducive to learning. The second continuum is that between cooperation and opposition. Cooperation is obvious, it's what it means. It's when we all show concern for the needs and opinions of other people, and we want to function together with them. We desire to function as a member of a team. Opposition, on the other hand, is when we display active antagonism, and we see the situation as one that requires that we thwart everybody else's goals and desires so that we can fulfill our own. Now, it's easy to guess what the positive rapport mix is like. Which of the 4 areas do you think positive rapport will be? 1, 2, 3, or 4? You want to show me with your fingers? 2, 1, 3, 4. Okay, you're right. Optimal rapport is in number 2, when there is relatively high control and high cooperation. But control can easily be misunderstood. Some teachers may think that control is about being a dictator, is about telling everyone what to do and when to do it, when to speak, when to stop speaking, slapping people across the face. No, control is not like that. Control is about a couple of things that will ensure the learners and the teacher work well together according to rules. One of those things is assertiveness. Being assertive as a teacher basically means being clear about your objectives and being clear about what's supposed to be happening at each stage of the lesson. Learners, whatever their age, do know that assertiveness is part of what they can expect of a teacher, that the teacher is in control at the end of the day, and that they make decisions about what the learning objectives should be, whether they're being met, and all that. So how can we be assertive without making the learners feel bad? The first thing to do is to check our body language. This has to do with making eye contact and keeping it, maintaining an erect posture while facing the students, but at the same time keeping a safe distance so they don't feel they're being threatened, and matching the expression on your face with the content of the message. Let me demonstrate, because the same things are true of the online classroom. Look at me. Does it look like I'm looking at you or not? Am I looking at you? Now? No, actually, you know, this is one of the strangest things about online teaching. When you do look at people, because I am actually now looking at some of you, at your faces on my screen, and that makes me look like I'm not looking at you. Because to appear to be looking at you, I have to look at the camera, not at your faces. Now, this is a fairly safe distance. For some, this would be even better. But how would you feel if I continued delivering my presentation like this? Does this make you feel better? So that's what we mean about a safe distance. Even online, people can feel that you're all over me, all over them. Yeah, you're all over them. So keeping a distance that feels safe, maintaining eye contact, and also using your facial expression to match the content is as important online as it is in the physical classroom, in the face-to-face classroom. The second aspect of assertiveness, or useful measure of assertiveness, is using the right tone of voice, speaking clearly and deliberately, using a pitch that's a little elevated when necessary, but avoiding any indication of emotion. So imagine the learners are making a lot of noise. One way of dealing with it is by saying, "Can you all stop making noise, please? This is getting irritating. Pay attention to me." What's wrong here? I have used a terribly high pitch. I've elevated the volume a little, but mostly the pitch, and it's made people feel bad, hasn't it? Do you think you could handle it if I continue talking like this for the rest of the seminar today? So sometimes it is best to go down rather than up if you want people to pay attention. Maybe speak more slowly and at a lower pitch, but at any rate, try to avoid showing emotion in your voice, because that can make people feel exasperated, you know? So that's what we mean here, speaking clearly and deliberately. And if even so, there is a discipline problem, like an inappropriate behavior. Someone keeps talking while they're supposed to be listening. Or you tell a student, "Can you stop doing that?" And they say, "I'm not doing anything. It's Lamia that's doing it." What you do then? Well, be very clear about the behavior that is or is not acceptable. Do not ignore, do not be diverted, listen, but do not change your mind because people are insisting on what they feel that they should be doing. Let's look at a scenario, a classroom scenario, and let's think about whether we think this is appropriate or not. I'll let you have a read of this classroom scenario. John is the teacher here. Do we think what he's doing is appropriate or not? Maybe you can send a message to say whether you think this is a good idea. So say yes, good idea, or no, terrible idea. I see there's already some disagreement. So let's see. The good thing about what John does here is he involves his students in decision making, so that when they arrive at a set of rules, they can own them. Yeah, at the end of the day, they can arrive at a compromise, a rule that they can all agree on. And they also feel that there are rules that we can talk about, we can agree on, but at the same time, there are rules that are not negotiable. As a teacher, you would decide on your own limits, right? So what sort of things you want to discuss, what sort of things are not negotiable. Now, some of you are saying you feel that even marks, which for John are not negotiable, should be negotiable, should be up for discussion. Now, that depends on the policies of the school and on your own attitude. But I think what John means here is we cannot, negotiate in the sense that you tell me, you give me an A, teacher, because I say so. But we can discuss rules about coming in late, we can discuss rules about talking in your native language or not, and so on. I think one of the ways in which you can get people to be more accepting and therefore to abide by the rules is if they feel that they have been involved in the decision-making process, in the rule decision process, in the rule specification. So if at the beginning of the year you get a class discussion going to agree on rules, and then at the end you have a kind of class contract that all students want to abide by, that can make it more likely. It will not ensure 100% that it happens, but it will make it more likely that more students will follow these rules. The second area in which control is important is when thinking about learning goals. Not having clear learning goals, or not knowing the learning goals, or allowing the learning goals to be up for grabs at all times means you lose control of the class. So establishing clear objectives at the beginning of a unit and at the beginning of a lesson, and then providing or eliciting feedback on these objectives at the end, is a necessary part of good rapport. At the same time, though, again, we want the learners to own this procedure. So revisiting the objectives with the students, discussing their progress, demonstrating their progress, and being very clear about what your assessment criteria are. Those are parts of controlling the objectives and therefore controlling the content of your lessons. Shall we look at another scenario, and you tell me again what you like or don't like about it? Another teacher, here I named him Mario, and a female teacher who I named Tessa. So maybe you can each write in the chat who you think is doing better, Mario or Tessa? I think the verdict here is unanimous, isn't it? Everybody's saying Tessa, Tessa, Tessa. So what is it that Tessa does that is good? She gives the learners the criteria, the rubric, they're called in some countries, and she makes sure that the learners understand what is expected before they submit an assignment, so they know what goal to work towards. As a result, she doesn't get asked about grades, she doesn't receive complaints, because the learners know what to do, and they know what the teacher is doing and why. So part of the control that you have to exert in the classroom has to do with everybody, the students more than anyone, being very clear about expectations, standards, benchmarks, as Lamia said, and the clarity of rubrics, the clarity of rules, the clarity of regulations. So that's what control is about. Basically, being very clear about what is expected, both in terms of behavior and in terms of performance. Now let's look at how to maximize the other aspect of good rapport, which is cooperation. The first thing we can do as teachers to encourage cooperation is to involve the learners as individuals by personalizing materials and tasks. So that would involve, first of all, finding out what kind of material the learners enjoy reading, listening to, talking about in their mother tongue. So we find out what the topics are that they want to discuss, find out about, learn about, and which we can often include, sometimes directly, if we can make decisions about content, sometimes indirectly, if the content, the course book has been imposed by someone else, but we can still look at things from an angle that encourages the learner to invest personally. We can give learners choices of which task they would like to do. Like, would you like to do this individually or together? Would you like to do a homework assignment on A or B? Very often, the same learning objective can be served using different activities, so the learners can get a feeling that they can use their own preferences, or you pay attention, you respect their own preferences when making at least some of the choices that you have to make as a teacher. Sometimes it is also possible to involve students in material selection. Now, I realize that we all have, or most of us have, a syllabus that we have to cover, but maybe occasionally we can invite learners to suggest material, or you can have an hour every other week, an hour every 3 weeks, an hour every month, in which you've agreed you will work on material that is suggested by the students. This makes them feel that they are, well, first of all, they are recognized, they are paid attention to, and secondly, you care about them as people, not just about what grade they will get. Shall we look at a scenario with this type of procedure? Hola. How do we feel about what hola does? Good idea? Okay, we're nodding, we're thumbs upping. So yes, absolutely. So what's special about this? That with a very, very small intervention, she's kept basically the topics in the book, but she can add one or two that the learners have expressed interest in. So it's like a compromise. You know, yes, we're going to talk about the things that are in the book and that the syllabus has imposed on us, but we can also add the couple that we want to talk about. And also, by asking students to write down additional topics that they suggest, she again shows that she cares. And she cares about the learners as people, not just as learning machines. Taking a personal interest is in fact easier than it looks. It can involve simple things like talking with students informally before and after class, and that applies to the e-class as well, right? As the students are joining the virtual classroom, we do chat sometimes. I know teachers who don't. They say, okay, we start at 4, I will only speak at 4. And until then they have their camera off and their microphone off. But it's useful, you know, to turn it on a couple of minutes before and make sure that you chat a little with the learners before the class and maybe after class. If you're in a school or university environment, you can also learn about important events in students' lives. So what's happening in sports this week or other extracurricular activities in the school, and you can informally, incidentally comment on those during your lessons. You can use what you've learned to compliment students on their achievements, both in and outside the school. And never forget to meet the students as they come in and to say hello. I know it sounds stupid that I should say that, but it is the very basic things that we sometimes forget. You know, that this is a good opportunity to develop a good relationship with the student very easily, very simply, by, you know, just being there and as they come in saying hello. And that applies to the virtual class as well, right? So here is taking a personal interest scenario. Now, first few minutes of each class, this could be a couple of minutes, this could be 3 minutes, it doesn't need to take forever. And sometimes, you know, from this conversation, you can remember things. If you're not as old as me and your memory is still good, you may be able to remember, you know, what Mary told you at the beginning of the class and refer to it later, right? If not, you can make a note. If you can't, you know, your memory doesn't work well anymore, like mine doesn't. So, you know, maybe in this class, Tina was looking at the present perfect. So she heard things from the students at the beginning, and then she uses examples that incorporate what they told her. So that makes the students feel really respected. And as long as you make sure that across lessons you refer to everyone, the students will feel that you really care. The only downside here is don't only talk about Kate. You know, maybe today you can use an example about Kate and an example about Ferouz. Next week you can, or in the next lesson, you can use examples about other people. And Across time, you would comment on different people in this way. Marina does something similar to what we suggested before in the school where she works. She reads the school newspapers, she looks at the announcement board and the notice board and finds out what's happening in the school. She chats to other teachers in the staff room and finds out what the learners are doing. And she asks the students about their school life. So things like, hey, you have this big exam tomorrow on maths, how are you feeling about it? Would you rather do something relaxing in English class today so that, you can focus on your maths later? Or I heard about your big win in the football match, congratulations. It's easy to show that you care. Even if you really don't care, it's easy to show that you care, right? And it works wonders with the students. Now, cooperation also involves taking a personal interest in the students and displaying a positive behavior to them that they can also copy themselves. I've talked about some aspects of displaying positive behavior, like making eye contact, looking into the camera when addressing them. Can I add mentioning students' names as far as you can? I think someone just mentioned exactly that in the chat a few minutes ago. Yes, Ferouz did. She mentioned nomination, right? And how important nominating students using their names to recognize them is. Making sure to call on all of them, not just the ones who respond more quickly or more frequently. And bear in mind that people sometimes need time, so don't be afraid of silence. Allow some wait time. Sometimes we get so afraid that the learners are not following us or that they need more help, that the second we've asked a question, we rephrase it. Or we say things like, so who can give me an example of the present perfect? Come on, anyone? Anyone? An example of the present perfect? Present perfect? Someone, please? Wait, give them 5 seconds. People need time to process, they need time to think. It's not the end of the world if there is a 5-second or 10-second time, 10-second silence. Yes, I do try, thank you for the comment, Nicholas. I do try to be silent. I don't always manage. Now, when I give a presentation like this with a lot of people, it's more difficult to be silent, but I do try. So here is what Dinah does to ensure that she displays positive behavior. She listens. Not only does she make a note of interesting things that students say, she also makes a note of the names. So the following day, she can very cleverly project a slide where she says, according to Muhammad, this and that. As Maria said yesterday, this and that. So again, this feeling that you're listening, that you're recognizing, can enhance the positivity of the relationship with the students. Now, what is it though that students mainly are in danger of interpreting as a threat? It's when they say something wrong and it needs to be corrected. So positive cooperation also involves responding appropriately to errors and mistakes that are made. So a couple of pointers here. It's important to emphasize what was right. Now, this is something that in the first few years of my career, I did not do. And I had no idea I wasn't doing it. If a student made a mistake, I would point out the mistake. If a student said something right, I would move on. So they got the negative feedback, but they didn't get the positive feedback. And then I started learning French at quite an advanced age. And my French teacher did everything wrong, but she did one thing right. If I managed to utter a word that I pronounced correctly, or even half a word, she would say, Bien, bien sûr, Monsieur Vassilakis. And I would feel so good. You know, I was 30-something, and I still needed the teacher to tell me that I was doing well. It was then that I realized how important it is for teachers to emphasize what is right and to give loads of positive feedback. The other thing that we need to do when responding to errors is similar to what I was saying before, allowing time and getting learners to confer and seek help from peers before answering in public. That's a good reason for example, if you've asked them to do a little exercise in class, like read something and decide if 5 statements are true or false. Before you ask them for their answers, put them in pairs and say, check, have you got the same answer as the person next to you? Why? Because when you call upon them after that and they make a mistake, it feels less painful when you know that you're not the only one that's made a mistake. So it's more painful if I say, it's false, isn't it? You say, no, it's true. If I've also asked another 2 people and they also thought that it was false, it feels better. I'm not the only one that misunderstood. I'm not the only one that made a mistake. So do give them the chance to confer before answering in public. And if you see that a learner is getting an answer wrong or is taking a long time to answer, sometimes it may be enough, especially if it's just a lapse or a mistake rather than a systematic error, to rephrase your question, to ask it a second time, and that will show the learner they need to think again and try a different answer. So what I'm saying is wait a little before indicating that something is wrong. Ask again to give them the chance to give the right answer. If they're really struggling, give them a hint, give them a cue, help them to gradually come up with the right answer. And respect their right to pass. Pass means, I don't want to answer that question. Don't insist. If a student says, I can't or I won't answer that question, move on to someone else. You can return to the student later when they feel a little more comfortable.
Sorry, George, we're down to the last 10 minutes.
I know, and I'm getting there.
Thank you.
So, scenario for responding appropriately to errors. Jeremy is doing the right thing, yes or no? Yes or no? Chat, everyone. Do we like Jeremy? Do we hate Jeremy? We like him. Thank you. Okay. What Jeremy does here that is good is, first of all, he gets learners to talk to each other, to collaborate. Secondly, he gives them choices. So these are some of the things that you can do to improve rapport. But there's a lot of comments that I've seen, a lot of questions, and Lamia has already indicated this is when I should stop speaking and maybe concentrate on these questions. So let's go. There was a comment that I saw flashing by that I wanted to comment on first of all. Some of you talked about recasting, right? Recasting means the learner says, I have been to the cinema last night. And you say, oh great, you went to the cinema last night. What did you see? So you don't make an issue of correcting them, but you do incorporate the right answer somehow. That is clearly a good idea because it lets students notice what they are ready to notice, and it doesn't make them feel terrible about making a mistake. But as Feroz pointed out, sometimes people might be discouraged by recasting if it is done insensitively. And sometimes I would add students may not notice that something is being recast. If they don't notice it, don't worry. They don't notice it means they're not ready for it. Means they need more time to internalize the rule. If people are blushing and taking offense, your recasting sucked. You have to do it a different way. Let me give you an example of terrible recasting. So, I've been to church this morning. You went to church this morning, right? This morning, you went. That's not recasting. That's telling them you made a mistake. It was a terrible mistake, and I am emphasizing it for everyone to hear. I'm not saying there are not, moments, instances in a lesson when you correct more directly, but there may be other instances where you correct by recasting in a more sensitive manner. So, Feroz, if that's what you saw in that seminar, it was the lecturer's fault. I'm sorry. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask, either in the chat or here? Yes? No?
I want to ask you a question. Am I audible? Yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, congratulations, Mr. George, for a very informative presentation. I myself, including the audience, we've learned lots of points and we're taking home lots of takeaways. This was one of the insightful presentations I've attended recently with lots of scientific research and facts and details. Thank you very much. My question is, at some point during your presentation, you were talking about connecting with the students before and after the lesson. And you said that, the level of formality should be minimized in those, let's say, minutes before or after. It should be more like a colloquial and friendly and less formal. So my take on, approaching the classes is very laid back. Well, I try to remove any form of formality from the surface of my lessons. So how do you respond to this style of teaching when the entire lesson is pretty laid back? There's no sort of formality. And is it going to cause any classroom management or rapport issues down the path?
I think that depends. First of all, let me clarify. I never said you need to change or to adapt the level of formality in that situation, but I did say it's a good idea to communicate on a personal level with the students before and after class for a couple of minutes. Now, how formal or how intimate this communication is going to be depends on the student's age, the context, and the conventions and expectations of the culture in which you are working and the school in which you are working. I think there is no educational context in which, very high degrees of intimacy would be allowed between teacher and learners. So you wouldn't be talking about how you went out last night and how much you drank in the local pub. But you could talk about, what kind of movies you like, or you could talk about a book you read, and they can talk about, a series they watch on Netflix or whatever. And show interest is all I said, right? So I've had people like a group of teenagers some years ago that all they wanted to talk about was the Kardashians. Now, this was some years ago. I didn't even know who the Kardashians were. I did my research, I did my homework. When I got home, I found out, and I went back and I feigned interest. And I said, okay, interesting. So, yes, and what did Kim do today? And they love talking about it. It doesn't matter. My objective is for them to use their English and to show that I care, right? We have time for more questions, Lamia?
Yes.
Maybe half a question more.
I just want to, before the question, I just want to tell everybody that there is a link down below. You will register your name and you'll be able to receive a certificate of attendance. So please make sure before you leave, you register using that link in the chat box. And yes, we're open for any more questions. Please unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat box.
Okay.
So hello, Lamina. I don't see the link.
All right, we will send it again. Because
Educational Webinar Gen has now sent the link.
Okay.
I have one more question if there is no question.
Make it quick first, though.
Yes, you touched upon personalization, right? Mm-hmm. Your interpretation was slightly different. Like you said, I would try to do a little bit of background check on what my students read in their home language.
Yeah,
I
find out
never
about
did
their
that.
personal interests.
I never did that when I was teaching in Poland or China. So I thought, let's say if I'm teaching to a group of Spanish students, I have no idea of what the Spanish literature is like. So does it really matter to personalize in that way?
It matters to the students. So if you can make the time to find out a few things about their interests, it will pay.
I mean, the literature.
Even literature or, local culture, whatever their interests are. When students know that you know or that you care, even if you don't know, but you care and you want to learn, they will appreciate it.